Hey folks, we're going to try something a little bit differently. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead, and I want to answer a few of your questions that come up. First off, if you're interested in starting a small farm, homestead, or an estate, you got to know the difference between the different types of properties because they have different purposes, different setups. So first off, a homestead. Homestead is usually going to be a family residence on 3 to 5 acres. It could be more land, but the 5 acres around the home is going to be your primary focus. You're likely to have smaller animals, rabbits, chickens, quail, that kind of thing. And you're likely to look towards self-sufficiency. A lot of people who want to set up homesteads are setting up a homestead to have food security, to have some freedom. So for example, if you live in a city and they complain every time you have a decent sized garden out in the country or in the county, a homestead will give you plenty of room for an acre or 2 acre garden. If you want to have orchards, you're going to put a little more investment into the land. A homestead is a great place to do that because the intention of a homestead is to provide kind of a family environment, a family lifestyle, kind of slow down and enjoy nature and ultimately bring people together. So if you like to entertain, a homestead's a great place to start. But you can go from a homestead to a small farm. So again, the homestead is going to be 5 acres. That's a good walkable size. Usually around the house is where you're cultivating your zone 1 and zone 2 in the permaculture language. But a small farm might actually have different kinds of larger livestock, goats, hogs, different types of cattle, sheep, whatever's appropriate for your environment. A small farm is going to generate income by maybe somebody still working at a full-time job. So a homestead, you might be working remote. A farm, you can still work remote. But a farm might require you to go work in town while you're getting the livestock and the farm product kind of established. So you may have a market garden, which is growing vegetables that are popular at the local farmer's market or a local grocery store. You're going to be maybe raising a few more animals. So the concept on a homestead, you might have 3 pigs. You sell 2 pigs and you keep 1 pig. And basically the sale of the 2 pigs pays for all the feed and the 1 pig that you put in the freezer. So you're paying yourself in meat. Well, a small farm, you might have 20 pigs, 15 pigs. Just depends on what your land will bear. Goats, for example, sheep, those kind of things, you might value add the fur off the sheep. But a small farm is not going to have llama and low utility animals. So a homestead might have low utility pets, chickens that are pets, goats that are pets, a bunch of dogs or something like that. But a small farm is going to be more oriented towards a business approach. So the homestead has high utility value and how you're managing your home like a business, but a small farm actually is a business. So you're going to go from 5, 10, 20, actually probably 50 acres or more. Now, this is not tax advice, but the IRS is less likely to call your farm a hobby if you have more than 50 acres and you have cultivation of the majority of the land. So a small farm might have an acre of corn. It might have corn, might have a corn, beans, or whatever, but it's an acre of it. It's going to have other activities happening. So you may have 50 chickens, and you may be hatching chickens and selling little chicks. You might be raising a large number of eggs in a small farm that you're selling in the market. Now, the level above that is kind of an estate. So an estate is a combination of both the homestead and the farm, and an estate tends to be multi-generational. So yes, you can have your parents come live with you on a farm. A homestead, you might have a tiny house or a smaller house, so that might not be as practical, but you could have more than one house on the property depending on the size of the property. But a small farm, again, is agricultural business. An estate might have a larger home that you're sharing multi-generational. You may have family members staying there. Your kids might live there. They may live somewhere else on the property, but you're going to have 50 or more acres, which you're going to have some in cultivation, but you could be a landscape architect, for example. You could be a lawyer. You could do a lot of entertaining. So you may have that zone 1 and zone 2 may be a little bit more ornamental, and then you have a separate area that is the farm. So it's kind of the homestead and the farm combined, and just a little bit more ornamental, a little nicer. Now, a lot of folks say, Justin, when you say estate, do you mean like the Rockefellers? Do you mean like Biltmore Estate? Yes and no. So some clients do have they might have restored an old mansion. They might have ornamental gardens or show gardens, and then the plant nursery and other stuff's out and away, but it could still be a modest size home. It's just how you're managing the property. Are you entertaining clients, bring them to the property, so you want it to be a little bit more elevated, a little bit more show. So a permaculture design institute, for example, is an estate. They may be multiple homes on the property. You might have a part-time or full-time caretaker. So a homestead, you're probably not hiring in a bunch of people. You're tend to doing all the work yourself. Small farm, you might hire a farmhand. I'm actually a farmhand on somebody else's farm. So I have a full-time job. I have a side business that does publishing, and then I'm a farmhand on somebody else's farm. I go work there sometimes 10 hours a week, sometimes 20 hours a week, but sometimes it's just a weekend, depending on what the season is. Now on an estate, you may have a full-time farm manager. You may have several farm hands. You might have ecotourism activities that you do on the farm or on the estate itself. The estate may have a main home, but you have an area that is maybe a training center or a campsite where you have Boy Scouts come through, or you have people learning natural wildcrafting skills. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do those things on a homestead, but the estate is managed by a property manager, and very often has a more formal approach, because you could have Schedule C income. In the United States, you could have several Schedule C income, which is small business income, and that could be a company. Actually, there's a guy here that has a nice estate that has a big warehouse in the back that's a woodworking shop, and they do custom woodworking. And then they have a forestry company, and down the road they have another building, and they have their heavy equipment. That's an estate. You're going to manage that a little bit different. Now, it doesn't mean the estate's worth millions and millions of dollars, but you will accumulate value in the property if you're managing it the right way, where you'll definitely hit $1 million pretty easily. You're either going to hit $1 million in land value, or you're going to hit $1 million in the revenue generated off the property. Now, don't let that discourage you if you're starting anywhere along that spectrum, because a homestead is where you get debt-free. It's where you get you start turning assets into cash flow. A homestead is where you test ideas. You can start with the homestead, but then if you get the opportunity to buy land around you, you can expand into a small farm, and then from there you can expand into an estate. So there's a couple other estates around here that has the main house, and then it has the mother-in-law suite. So there's another house kind of within walking distance, but that's where the mother-in-law lives. That's where when they retire and they're downsized and the family's living there. Now, the advantages of an estate, or moving towards an estate, is the combined assets. Usually estates are run by a business or under a trust. And so, if you've got elderly parents, they can move in and you can help provide for them. You share a lot of expenses. It's the difference between feeding 4 people and 6 people. It really doesn't make that much of a difference. If you're going to have relatives coming in and out of town, you may not want them to live in your main house. You may want to have a 1,000 square foot house so that it's easy to clean and easy to maintain. That's my preference. I don't need a 10,000 square foot house or a 5,000 square foot house. I'm okay in a smaller space. But if you have regular guests, that has to be considered. Now, there's a couple other estates. They don't call themselves an estate. They call themselves a farm, but you can go camping there. There's one here that has concerts and outdoor events. It's just really the difference between just living there and doing things day to day, or having a business plan. Now, when I work with clients, I prefer to work out a plan. You're going to have a design plan for the property. You're going to have project plans for individual activities. You're going to be looking at how things cash flow, because in this world, we need the money in order to pay for the land. Now, again, I do also advocate the 8 forms of capital. The land itself is a form of capital, because the land has a production value that you can barter or trade with others in the community in order to get that next level of value. For example, maybe you're raising goats and you're milking goats. So you're doing value-add products such as cheese and kefir, that kind of thing. But the guy down the street's got cows. You don't have enough room for cows. You want a half a cow, they want cheese all year long. You can barter that relationship and move towards an estate, because you're not consuming the full value of what you produce on your land, and you're sharing the work. It's community. You're basically developing community. So an estate like the Renolda estate Initially, it was just a wealthy individual who built up some land, and then they eventually built a town around it. They had a main business running. Some estates might have timber on them, so you have your homestead on the 5 acres, and then in the back 25, it's timber. And then maybe over in a corner, you got a pond and you're fishing out there. Well, if you take that from a personal homestead, personal use, to a shared resource, such as an estate that's used for family recreation or even selling hunting licenses and such, you're increasing the cash flow on the property, but the management is different. So I hope that clears things up. I get a lot of questions about what's the difference between an estate, a small farm, and a homestead. And really where you should be on that spectrum is really up to you. There's nothing wrong with a 3 to 5 acre estate. You can feed your family, you can have the recreational opportunities, you can have the enjoyment that you're looking for, and you can do it on a salvaged piece of land. Basically, a land that's not good for much else. If you can squeeze 5 acres out of that, you're good to go. Now, I like to help clients buy property that has adjoining property that can be acquired and expand the size of the property. So I like to get you in there to buy an anchor piece of land and then build up around it according to your long-term plan. But in the short term, how do we get maximum value out of the land today? So you may, if you have a dream of a palatial estate, maybe you've watched some British show where they have servants and stuff, and that's where you want to be in the future. That's fine, but you may want to start as a homestead, even if it's a tiny house on blocks, to get you on the land and start getting you to utilize the land. It's almost the pioneering approach. Eventually the pioneers retired and they had their little cabin in the woods and they had their garden and they had their livestock and they went above subsistence. They went into town periodically or a rendezvous periodically to trade. You can go from homestead to small farm. You can go from homestead to estate. You can have a small farm on an estate or a homestead on an estate. But it's understanding that planning mentality. Because a lot of folks will tell me they just want to buy some cheap land. Well, if you're not strategic about it, all you're going to end up with is cheap land. And if all you end up with is cheap land, what's the next step? What if you have family members that need to consolidate a little bit because they're getting up in age? Maybe you have children that come back home after college or after working for a while, they got a divorce, and now they're living in your damn house. Wouldn't it be better if they had their own place on your land paying you rent? See, there's just a different mentality when you understand these 3 cycles, and I want to help you with that. Again, I'm Justin Hitt at Prosperity Homestead. If you visit www.prosperitymomestead.org and you ask your questions there, I'd be more than happy to answer them. We're here to help landowners get the maximum value of their land while being economically and ecologically sustainable, really building the value of that land, creating those other forms of capital, and ultimately living on your own terms. I'll see you in the next video.